The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty train depot in Kelton, Utah, and Willa Katherine pressed her roughened palms against the worn fabric of her only decent dress, trying in vain to smooth the wrinkles that 3 weeks of hard travel had pressed into the cotton. Through the grimy window she could see the vast expanse of desert stretching endlessly under the June sun of 1882, and her heart hammered against her ribs with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. She had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride because the Philadelphia factory where she had worked since she was 12 had finally broken her spirit, and the promise of open skies and honest work on a ranch had seemed like salvation written in ink on cheap newspaper. The driver opened the door and offered his hand, but Willa climbed down on her own, her calloused fingers gripping the frame as she stepped onto the wooden platform. She had learned years ago not to expect gentleness from the world. The small town of Kelton stretched before her, a collection of weathered buildings that seemed to huddle together against the harsh landscape. The railroad had brought life to this place, but it still carried the raw energy of the frontier, a settlement that existed because stubborn people willed it to. A man stood near the station office, his hat pulled low against the bright sunlight, and Willa knew without introduction that this must be Vernon Anders, the rancher who had placed the advertisement and exchanged 6 letters with her over the past 4 months. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who spent their days doing hard physical labor. As she approached with her single carpet bag clutched in both hands, he lifted his head and she saw a face that was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. "Miss Katherine?" His voice was deep and cautious, as though he feared she might disappear if he spoke too loudly. "Yes, you must be Mr. Anders." Willa set her bag down and extended her hand in greeting. The gesture automatic from years of working alongside men in the factory, she saw his eyes drop to her outstretched hand and realized too late that a proper lady would not offer to shake hands like a man. Heat flooded her cheeks, but before she could withdraw, Vernon stepped forward and took her hand in his. His grip was firm and warm, his palm as calloused as her own, but instead of releasing her hand after a brief shake, he held it gently and looked down at it. Willa felt her breath catch in her throat. Her hands were not the soft, pale hands of a lady. They were reddened and rough, the nails short and practical, the skin marked with old scars from factory machinery and years of scrubbing floors and hauling water. She had always been ashamed of them, those visible markers of her poverty and hard labor. Vernon turned her hand over carefully, his thumb tracing across her palm, and then he did something that made Willa's eyes sting with sudden tears. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart stumble. "These are beautiful hands," he said quietly. "These are the hands of someone who knows what it means to work, who understands the value of effort and perseverance. I am honored that you have traveled so far to meet me." Willa could not speak past the tightness in her throat. In all her 23 years, no one had ever called any part of her beautiful. She had been called capable, sturdy, reliable, but never beautiful. The factory foreman had once told her she had useful hands, hands that could work a loom faster than anyone else, but that had been a comment about her productivity, not about her worth as a person. "Thank you," she managed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Vernon released her hand slowly, as though reluctant to let go, and picked up her carpetbag. "I have a wagon waiting. It is about an hour to the ranch. I hope the journey was not too difficult." As they walked toward the wagon, Willa found her voice returning. "I have been traveling for 3 weeks. Another hour will not make much difference." Vernon helped her up onto the wagon seat, and this time Willa accepted the assistance, placing her rough hand in his without shame. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, guiding the 2 sturdy horses away from the depot and onto the dusty road that led out of town. For several minutes, they rode in silence. Willa studied the landscape, so different from the crowded, smoke-stained streets of Philadelphia. The desert stretched in all directions, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional scrubby tree. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. The sky was impossibly vast, a blue so intense it almost hurt to look at. "It is very empty," she said finally. "Yes, some people find it lonely, others find it peaceful." Vernon glanced at her. "Which do you think you will find it?" Willa considered the question seriously. "I think I will find it peaceful. In Philadelphia there were always too many people, too much noise. The factory where I worked ran 16 hours a day, and the machines never stopped their clattering. Even at night in the boarding house, there were 40 women in one building, coughing and crying and talking. I have not had silence in 11 years. 11 years? You started working at 12? My mother died when I was 11. My father died 2 years before that. I had a younger brother, but he died of fever the winter after Mother passed. The factory was the only place that would take me." Willa kept her voice steady, reciting the facts without emotion. She had learned not to dwell on the losses. They were simply the reality of her life. Vernon's hands tightened on the reins. "That must have been very difficult." "It was life. Many people had it worse." Willa paused, then added, "Your letter said you have a cattle ranch. How many head do you run?" She saw him appreciate the change of subject. "About 300 right now. I have been building the herd for 6 years. The ranch belonged to my father originally. He came out here in 1870 with my mother and my 2 younger sisters. I was 18 then. He thought Utah would be a good place to start over after the war." "Did he fight?" "Yes, for the Union. He came home different than when he left, quieter. He thought the open spaces might help him forget." Vernon's voice carried an old sadness. "He died 4 years ago. A horse threw him, and he broke his neck. My mother passed 2 years later. My sisters both married and moved away. Sarah went to California with her husband. Margaret is in Salt Lake City." "So you run the ranch alone?" "I have 2 hired hands who help with the cattle and the heavy work, Carlos and his son Miguel. They live in the bunkhouse near the barn, but yes, essentially I run it alone. That is why He paused, seeming to search for words. "That is why I placed the advertisement. A ranch is not meant to be run by one person. It is meant to be a home, a family place. But more than that, I wanted—" He trailed off, and Willa waited. "Finally," he continued, his voice lower, "I wanted a partner, someone who understands work and values it. Someone who will not expect luxuries I cannot provide, but who will appreciate what I can offer. When I read your letter, the way you wrote about wanting open spaces and honest work, I thought perhaps you might be that person." Willa felt something warm unfold in her chest. "I will not lie to you, Mr. Anders. I do not know anything about ranching. I can sew and cook and clean, but I have never been around cattle or horses except on the streets. I am willing to learn, but I will make mistakes. Vernon, please call me Vernon. And I expected nothing else. I will teach you what you need to know." He glanced at her again, and there was something almost shy in his expression. "In your letters you said you like to read. I do not have many books, but I have a few, and I order more when I can. I thought it was a good sign. My mother loved to read. She used to say that books were windows to bigger worlds." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She would have liked you, I think." They rode on, and Willa found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. Vernon did not press her with questions or expectations. He pointed out landmarks as they traveled, explaining the geography of the area. He showed her where the property line of his ranch began, marked by a wooden post and a fence line that stretched away toward the horizon. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low rise. It was a solid structure built of wood and stone, larger than Willa had expected, with a wide porch across the front. Nearby stood a barn, a corral with several horses, and a smaller building that must be the bunkhouse. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a large trough. "It is not fancy," Vernon said, "but it is sturdy. I added the porch 2 years ago. My mother always wanted a porch where she could sit in the evening. It looks like a real home, Willa said, and she meant it. After years in cramped boarding houses and factory dormitories, the sight of this solid, permanent dwelling made something in her chest ache with longing. Vernon pulled the wagon up in front of the house and helped her down. 2 men emerged from the barn, one older with gray in his dark hair, the other younger and lean. Vernon introduced them as Carlos Mendoza and his son Miguel. Both men greeted her politely in accented English, and Willa saw curiosity but no hostility in their eyes. "I will let you get settled," Vernon said, leading her up the porch steps. "I thought you might want some time to rest before supper. We usually eat around 6. Inside, the house was clean and simply furnished. Vernon showed her through the main room, which held a large fireplace, a worn but comfortable sofa, and a table with chairs. The kitchen was well organized with a good stove and plenty of storage. He led her down a short hallway and opened a door. "This was my parents' room. I have been sleeping in the smaller room since my mother died. I thought you might want to use this one. It has the bigger bed and more space. I thought you would want your own space until you feel comfortable." Willa stepped into the room and looked around. The bed was large and covered with a beautiful quilt in shades of blue and green. A dresser stood against one wall, and there was a window that looked out over the desert. It was the nicest room Willa had ever had. "Thank you," she said. "This is more than I expected." Vernon set her carpet bag on the bed. "I will let you rest. There is a pitcher of water on the dresser. I will be in the barn if you need anything." After he left, Willa sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking slightly, the aftermath of nerves and exhaustion. She looked down at them, at the rough, reddened skin and the short, practical nails. Vernon had called them beautiful. He had kissed them. She stood and went to the window, looking out at the vast landscape. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In Philadelphia, she had rarely seen the sunset, blocked as it was by buildings and factory smoke. Here, it dominated the entire sky, a daily reminder of the world's beauty. Willa unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the wardrobe and placing her undergarments in the dresser. She had a Bible that had belonged to her mother, a small sewing kit, and a book of poetry that she had saved for months to buy. These few items looked lost in the large dresser, but Willa did not mind. She had never had much, and she did not miss what she had never possessed. She washed her face and hands in the basin, then braided her dark hair and pinned it up neatly. The mirror over the dresser showed her a thin, pale face with serious gray eyes and a mouth that rarely smiled. She was not pretty, Willa knew. Her features were too sharp, her build too thin and angular, but Vernon had not seemed disappointed when he saw her, and that was more than she had dared hope for. At 6, she emerged from the bedroom to find Vernon in the kitchen, pulling a pot of stew from the stove. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger. She had not eaten since a quick breakfast at dawn. "I'm not a fancy cook," Vernon said, "but I can make basic things. Carlos's wife, Maria, used to help us, but she passed away last year. Since then, we have been managing on our own." "Let me help." Willa moved to the counter and saw bread wrapped in cloth. "Should I slice this?" "Yes, thank you." They worked together in comfortable silence, and Willa noticed how Vernon moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity. He was not a man who expected to be waited on. He set the table with tin plates and cups, poured water from a pitcher, and dished out the stew with the efficiency of long practice. The food was simple but good: hearty beef stew with vegetables and thick slices of bread. Willa ate slowly, aware that her stomach had shrunk from years of inadequate meals. Vernon watched her with concern. "You are very thin. Did they not feed you enough at the factory?" "They fed us, but not much. Most of my wages went to pay for the boarding house and to save for a better future. I did not spend money on extra food." "You will not go hungry here. We raise our own beef, And I have a good garden out back. Carlos helps me tend it. I also have chickens for eggs and a milk cow. We do all right. After supper, Vernon showed her the rest of the house. There was a small room that served as his office, with a desk covered in papers and ledgers. He explained the ranch's operations, how they raised cattle and sold them in the fall, how he was trying to build up the herd and improve the bloodlines. Willa listened carefully, trying to understand this new world she had entered. When the sun set completely, Vernon lit oil lamps, and they sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. The stars emerged one by one, and Willa gasped at the sheer number of them spreading across the sky in a glittering cascade. "I have never seen so many stars," she whispered. "The sky is clearer here. No smoke from factories, no city lights, just stars." Vernon leaned back in his chair. "My mother used to sit here every evening and watch them appear. She said it reminded her that the world was bigger than our troubles." They sat in silence for a while, and Willa felt the tension of the day slowly draining away. Finally, Vernon spoke again, his voice quiet. "I want you to know that I have no expectations beyond what you are willing to give. We can be married by the circuit judge when he comes through next month, but until then, and even after if you prefer, you can have your own space. I will not pressure you. I want you to feel safe here." Willa turned to look at him, this man who had kissed her rough hands and called them beautiful, who offered her safety and space, and the gift of patience. "Why did you choose me?" "There must have been other women who answered your advertisement, women with more skills, more education." Vernon was quiet for a moment. "There were a few other responses, but your letter was different. You did not try to pretend to be something you were not. You wrote honestly about your life, about working in the factory, about wanting open spaces and clean air. You wrote about missing silence. That told me you were someone who had been through hardship but had not become bitter. And your handwriting." He paused. "Your handwriting was careful and precise. Even though the paper was cheap and the ink was thin, it told me you were someone who took pride in doing things well, even when circumstances were difficult." Willa felt tears prick at her eyes again. "I tried very hard to write a good letter. I borrowed better paper from one of the other girls at the boarding house. I could tell that effort mattered to me." Vernon stood and stretched. "It is late, and you must be exhausted. I will see you in the morning. Sleep as long as you need. There's no rush to start work immediately." Willa also stood. On impulse, she reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you for everything, for your kindness." Vernon covered her hand with his, and Willa felt the warmth of his palm, the calluses that matched her own. "You are welcome here, Willa. I hope you will come to think of this as home." In the bedroom, Willa changed into her nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. The bed was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in years. Through the open window, she could hear the sounds of the desert night, the chirp of insects and the distant howl of a coyote. Instead of feeling frightened, she felt oddly peaceful. She thought about Vernon's hands, rough and strong like her own. She thought about the way he had looked at her, with respect, and something that might have been wonder. In Philadelphia, she had been invisible, just another factory girl among hundreds. Here, she was seen. Willa woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of a rooster crowing. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came back in a rush. Utah. The ranch. Vernon. She sat up and saw that the sun was already well above the horizon. She had slept far later than she had intended. She dressed quickly in her work dress, the sturdy gray cotton that she wore for heavy tasks, and hurried to the kitchen. Vernon was there, cleaning up from what looked like breakfast. "I am sorry," Willa said immediately. "I did not mean to sleep so late. I should have been up to make breakfast." Vernon turned, and there was no anger in his face, only concern. "You needed the rest. I told you to sleep as long as you needed. Did you think I would be angry?" In the boarding house, we were punished if we were late to anything, and the factory foreman would dock our pay if we were not at our stations on time. Vernon's expression darkened. "This is not a factory, and I am not a foreman. You are not here to be punished. Please sit down. There is coffee left, and I can make you some eggs." Willa sat, feeling off balance. Vernon poured her coffee and cracked eggs into a pan, cooking them with the same easy competence he had shown the night before. He set the plate in front of her with toast and butter. "After you eat, I thought I could show you around the ranch properly. You should know where everything is and how things work, and I should teach you about the animals so you will feel comfortable around them. I would like that." After breakfast, Vernon led her outside. The morning air was already warm, promising another hot day. He showed her the chicken coop first, explaining how to collect eggs and scatter feed. The chickens fluttered and clucked, and Willa found herself charmed by their fussy personalities. Next was the milk cow, a placid brown creature named Daisy. Vernon demonstrated how to milk her, his strong hands working the teats with practiced rhythm. "Would you like to try?" Willa knelt beside the cow and placed her hands uncertainly on the warm udders. Vernon guided her hands, showing her the motion, and after a few attempts, milk began to stream into the bucket. Willa laughed with surprise and delight. "You are a natural," Vernon said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Willa's heart flutter. They moved on to the horses next. Vernon introduced her to each one, explaining their personalities and quirks. There was Thunder, his own riding horse, a big gray gelding with a calm temperament. There was Rosie, a gentle mare that Vernon said would be good for Willa to learn on. And there were several others, including a pair of young horses that Vernon was training. "Can you ride?" he asked. "No, I have never been on a horse." "Then I will teach you. A ranch wife needs to know how to ride. It is too far to walk everywhere." Vernon saddled Rosie and led her to the mounting block. "Come here, I will help you up." Willa approached nervously. The horse seemed very large and very tall, but Vernon's presence was reassuring and his hands were steady as he helped her into the saddle. Willa clutched at the saddle horn, her heart racing. "Just sit for a moment. Get used to the feeling," Vernon said. He kept one hand on her leg, a steady, grounding pressure. "Rosie is gentle. She will not do anything sudden." They spent an hour with Willa simply sitting on the horse while Vernon led them around the corral at a walk. By the end, Willa was beginning to feel more comfortable, though her legs ached from the unfamiliar position. Over the following days, Willa settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke early and helped Vernon with the morning chores, collecting eggs and milking the cow. She learned to make bread, her rough hands kneading the dough with strength built from years of factory work. Vernon praised her bread extravagantly, eating 3 slices at supper and declaring it the best he had tasted since his mother died. She continued her riding lessons, graduating from being led around the corral to walking Rosie on her own. Vernon was patient, never pushing her beyond what she felt comfortable with, always there to offer guidance and encouragement. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked. Vernon told her stories about growing up in Ohio before the war, about his father's restlessness after returning from battle, about the journey west and the early struggles of establishing the ranch. Willa told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother's gentle kindness and her father's booming laugh about the cold shock of their deaths and the harsh reality of factory life. "I used to dream about open spaces," Willa said one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. "In the factory, we worked in a huge room with hundreds of looms, but it felt like the walls were pressing in. The noise was constant, and the air was thick with lint and dust. At night, I would lie in my narrow bed in the boarding house and imagine walking through fields of grass with nothing but sky above me." Vernon reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. "You have your open spaces now." "Yes?" Willa turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. "I have more than I ever dreamed of." The circuit judge arrived in Kelton 4 weeks after Willa's arrival. Vernon drove them into town in the wagon, and they were married in a brief ceremony in the town's small church, with Carlos and Miguel as witnesses. Willa wore her best dress, which she had carefully mended and pressed, and Vernon wore a clean shirt and vest. The judge was an elderly man with kind eyes who asked them to confirm that they entered into the marriage freely and willingly. When Willa said, "I do," her voice was clear and steady. Vernon slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and when the judge pronounced them married, Vernon kissed her gently, his lips warm and soft against hers. That evening, after they returned to the ranch, Willa stood in the bedroom that had been hers for the past month and looked at the ring on her finger. It was not fancy, but it was solid and real, a visible symbol that she belonged somewhere now. She belonged here, with Vernon. There was a soft knock on the door, and Vernon entered, looking uncertain. "I know we have not... That is, I do not want you to feel obligated. I can continue sleeping in the other room if you prefer." Willa walked to him and placed her rough, work-worn hands on his chest. She could feel his heart beating fast beneath her palms. "We are married. I want to be your wife in all ways." Vernon cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and Willa felt something warm and urgent unfold in her core. His hands moved to her waist, then up her back, careful and respectful, even in passion. Willa's fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, and Vernon helped her, shrugging out of the garment. In the lamplight, she could see the muscles of his chest and arms, the body of a man who worked hard every day. They undressed each other slowly, and when Vernon saw her thin body, marked by years of poor nutrition and hard labor, he kissed each visible rib, each sharp hip bone with a tenderness that made Willa weep. When he lifted her work-roughened hands to his lips again and kissed the palms, whispering that she was beautiful, Willa felt something inside her that had been locked away for years finally open. Their joining was gentle and careful, Vernon constantly asking if she was all right, if anything hurt. Willa clung to him, overwhelmed by the intimacy of it, by the strange and wonderful sensation of being held and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Vernon's arms around her, his breath warm against her neck. "I love you," Vernon whispered into the darkness. "I did not expect to, not so quickly, but I do. I love your strength and your honesty and your courage. I love that you are not afraid of hard work. I love your rough hands and the way you concentrate when you are learning something new. I love you, Willa." Willa turned in his arms to face him. "I love you too. I did not know what love felt like until now. I thought I would marry you and we would be partners, companions, and that would be enough. But this is more. You make me feel seen and valued. You make me feel beautiful even though I know I am not. You are beautiful to me. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known." Vernon kissed her forehead, her eyelids, her nose, her lips. "You are beautiful because you are genuine and strong and kind. Those things matter more than any physical appearance." Summer deepened into the fierce heat of July and August. Willa learned to handle the harsh Utah sun, wearing a wide-brimmed hat when she worked outside and drinking plenty of water. Her skin, which had been factory pale, began to tan and freckle. Her thin body filled out with regular, nutritious meals, and while she would never be plump, she no longer looked like she might break in a strong wind. She became proficient at riding, able to handle Rosie with confidence, and even beginning to learn on Thunder, who was more spirited. Vernon taught her how to rope, and while she was not as skilled as he was, she could catch a fence post more often than not. She learned to recognize the signs of illness in the cattle and horses, and she rode out with Vernon to check on the herd, marveling at the vastness of the ranch and the beauty of the landscape. Carlos and Miguel accepted her fully, treating her with respect and occasionally teaching her Spanish words and phrases. Miguel, who was 20 and shy, sometimes brought her wildflowers he found while riding, and Willa always thanked him warmly and put them in a jar on the kitchen table. The ranch felt like home now. Willa loved the solid house, the productive garden, the chickens with their silly squabbles, and the horses with their distinct personalities. But most of all, she loved the evenings with Vernon, sitting on the porch and watching the stars emerge, or reading together by lamplight in the main room, or lying in bed and talking about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Vernon said one evening in late August. They were lying in bed, the windows open to catch any hint of breeze in the summer heat. "With the railroad here in Kelton, we can ship cattle more easily. If I can get the herd up to 500 head, we could do very well. Maybe well enough to build a bigger barn and improve the bunkhouse." "That sounds like a good plan." Willa traced patterns on his chest with her finger. "What about children? Do you want children?" She felt Vernon's heart rate increase under her palm. "Do you?" "I think I do. I never thought I would back in Philadelphia. I could not imagine bringing a child into that life. But here, with you, I can imagine it. I can imagine a child running around the ranch, learning to ride, helping with the chores. A family." Vernon rolled to face her, his eyes bright, even in the dim light. "I would love to have children with you, a house full of them if we are blessed." "We should probably start with one and see how we manage," Willa said with a smile. By late September, Willa suspected she might be pregnant. Her monthly bleeding did not arrive, and she felt a persistent queasiness in the mornings. She said nothing to Vernon at first, not wanting to raise hopes until she was certain. But when 2 months passed with no bleeding and her breasts became tender and swollen, she knew. She told Vernon on a cool October evening. They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching the sunset. Willa took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There is a baby," she said simply. "Our baby. Growing here." Vernon's eyes went wide, and then his face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby! We are going to have a baby. Oh, Willa, I am so happy. Are you happy?" "I am terrified and thrilled, and yes, very happy," Willa said, her own tears flowing freely. "I do not know how to be a mother. I am afraid I will do it wrong. We will learn together, just like we learned everything else." Vernon kissed her deeply. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift." The pregnancy progressed through the winter months. Willa continued to do most of her chores, though Vernon fussed over her and would not let her lift anything heavy. Her body changed, her belly swelling gradually with the growing child. She made baby clothes from soft cloth that Vernon bought in town, her rough hands surprisingly deft with the delicate stitching. In late January, a blizzard swept across the Utah desert, an unusual but not unheard of event. For 3 days they were snowed in, with drifts piling up around the house and the temperature dropping brutally low. Vernon and Carlos worked frantically to keep the animals safe, bringing the horses into the barn and the cow into a sheltered corner. They lost 2 chickens to the cold despite their best efforts, but the rest of the animals survived. Willa kept the fire burning and made hot food for the men when they came in from their cold work. Her belly was large now, the baby due in about 2 months, and she moved carefully on the snow-slicked porch. Vernon made her promise not to go outside unless absolutely necessary. On the 3rd day of the storm, huddled together for warmth in front of the fireplace, Vernon talked about his fears. What if something goes wrong with the birth? The doctor is in Kelton, over an hour away in good weather. If there is a storm, or if the baby comes quickly, I do not know what we will do. Willa took his hand and squeezed it. Women have been having babies for thousands of years, often without doctors. Carlos told me his wife delivered both of their children with only a midwife present. I am healthy and strong. I will be all right, and so will the baby. I could not bear it if I lost you. You are everything to me. You will not lose me. I have survived too much to be defeated by childbirth. Willa spoke with more confidence than she felt, but she needed to be strong for Vernon. The blizzard finally broke on the 4th day, and the sun emerged to shine on a transformed landscape. Everything was white and pure, the desert buried under several feet of snow. It took days for the snow to melt enough for the wagon to travel to town, but by then the crisis had passed. In mid-March, On a warm spring day when the desert was beginning to bloom with wildflowers, Willa's labor began. She was hanging laundry on the line when she felt the first contraction, a tightening across her belly that made her pause and breathe carefully. She finished hanging the sheets, then went to find Vernon. He was in the barn, repairing a broken stall door. When she told him, his face went pale. "Should I ride for the doctor?" "Not yet. The pains are far apart. This could take many hours, but you should send Miguel to town to ask the doctor to come when he can." Vernon sent Miguel racing toward Kelton, then came back to hover anxiously around Willa. She labored through the afternoon, walking around the house and stopping when the contractions came. Vernon held her hand through each one, his face creased with worry. By evening, the contractions were closer together and more intense. Carlos's sister-in-law, Maria Elena, arrived from a neighboring ranch, an experienced woman who had delivered many babies. She took charge with calm efficiency, sending Vernon to boil water and fetch clean sheets. The labor lasted through the night. Willa had never known such pain, wave after wave of it, crushing and relentless. She cried out sometimes despite her determination to be stoic, and each time she did, she heard Vernon's voice through the door, begging to be let in. Finally, as dawn light began to creep through the windows, Maria Elena told Willa to push. Willa bore down with all her strength, her rough hands gripping the bed frame until her knuckles were white. She pushed again and again beyond exhaustion, running on pure determination. And then there was a baby's cry, thin and outraged, and Maria Elena was laughing and saying, "A boy, you have a strong son." Vernon burst through the door, propriety forgotten, and ran to the bed. Maria Elena handed him the baby, carefully wrapped in a soft blanket, and Vernon held his son with shaking hands. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the tiny, red, squalling infant. "He is perfect," Vernon whispered. "Willa, he is perfect. You did it. You are amazing." Willa, exhausted and overwhelmed, reached up to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers wrapped around hers instinctively, and Willa felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "What should we name him?" Vernon asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed so Willa could see the baby better. "I always liked the name James, after my father," Willa said. "James Anders." "James Anders." Vernon tested the name. "It is perfect. Hello, James. I am your father, and this is your mother, and we love you more than anything in the world." The doctor arrived an hour later, riding hard from Kelton. He examined both Willa and the baby and pronounced them healthy. "You did well, Mrs. Anders, and you have a fine, strong son. He should thrive." Over the following weeks, Willa recovered from the birth and learned to care for her son. James was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Vernon was a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and talking to his son constantly in a soft, loving voice. "I want him to hear how much he's loved," Vernon explained, when Willa teased him about his constant narration. "I want him to grow up secure and confident, knowing he is valued. He will know. How could he not with a father like you?" Spring turned to summer, and James grew from a tiny infant to a chubby, smiling baby who cooed and reached for things with his small hands. Willa carried him in a sling while she did her chores, and he seemed content to watch the world from his perch against her chest. Carlos and Miguel doted on the baby. Miguel especially delighted to have a child on the ranch. He carved James a wooden horse that became the baby's favorite toy. One evening in late July, when James was 4 months old and the summer heat was at its peak, Willa and Vernon sat on the porch with the baby asleep between them in a basket. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. "I was thinking," Vernon said quietly, "about how we met, about how I placed that advertisement and you answered it, about how easily it could have not happened. You could have answered a different advertisement. Someone else could have responded to mine. We could have missed each other entirely." Willa reached over and took his hand. But we did not miss each other. We found each other against all odds. A factory girl from Philadelphia and a cattle rancher in Utah. It seems impossible, but here we are. Here we are, Vernon repeated. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done that first day in Kelton. My beautiful wife with your beautiful hands. These hands that know the value of work. These hands that hold our son with such tenderness. These hands that I will love for the rest of my life. Willa felt tears sting her eyes, the happy tears that came so easily now. I spent so many years thinking I was not worthy of love because I was poor and uneducated and had rough hands that marked me as a laborer. I thought those things made me less than other people. But you taught me that they are part of what makes me strong. You taught me to see myself as valuable. You are the most valuable person in my life. You and James. Vernon pulled her close, carefully avoiding jostling the sleeping baby. I cannot imagine my life without you now. The ranch was just a place before you came. You made it a home. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. James stirred in his basket and made a small sound, and Willa lifted him into her arms, holding him against her shoulder. The baby nuzzled into her neck and settled back to sleep. I want more of these, Willa said softly. More children, I mean. Not right away, but eventually. I want James to have brothers and sisters. I want this house to be filled with noise and laughter and life. I want that too. As many children as you are willing to have. We will fill all the bedrooms. Vernon smiled. We might have to add on to the house. You say that like it is a bad thing? It is not a bad thing at all. It is a wonderful thing. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew from a baby to a toddler, learning to walk and then run, his laughter ringing across the ranch yard. When he was 2, Willa gave birth to a daughter, Clara, who had Willa's gray eyes and Vernon's dark hair. 2 years after Clara came twin boys, Robert and William, who were identical and mischievous from birth. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Vernon adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch prospered as well, the herd growing to over 600 head. They hired 2 more hands to help manage the increased workload. Willa's hands remained rough from work, marked by years of labor both in the factory and on the ranch. But now when she looked at them, she saw capable hands that had held 4 babies, that had helped birth calves and foals, that had kneaded bread and mended clothes and held the reins of a horse. She saw hands that Vernon still kissed regularly, telling her they were beautiful. James, at age 7, was already helping with the ranch work, proud to ride out with his father to check on the cattle. Clara, at 5, had declared herself in charge of the chickens and took her role very seriously. The twins, at 3, were into everything and kept Willa constantly busy. On a warm evening in early summer, the whole family sat on the expanded porch. The children were playing with a litter of puppies that the ranch dog had delivered, their shrieks of laughter filling the air. Vernon sat in his rocking chair, watching them with a contented smile. Willa sat beside him, her hand in his, and marveled at how her life had changed. 11 years ago, she had been a desperate factory worker, thin and exhausted and hopeless. She had answered an advertisement on a whim, barely daring to dream that something better might exist. Now she was the wife of a successful rancher, the mother of 4 healthy children, and the owner of rough hands that had built this life through hard work and determination. She had open spaces and clean air and silence whenever she wanted it. She had love and respect and a partner who valued her. What are you thinking about, Vernon asked, squeezing her hand. I'm thinking about how grateful I am for you, for our children, for this life. I'm thinking about how far I have come from that factory in Philadelphia. We have come far together, Vernon corrected gently. I was existing before you came, but I was not really living. You brought life and joy and purpose to this place. You made it matter. James ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. Papa, one of the puppies climbed on Clara and licked her face, and she fell over. Is she all right? Willa asked. Yes, she is laughing. Can we keep all the puppies, please? We will see, Vernon said diplomatically. Now go play, and watch your brothers. Make sure they do not get too rough with the puppies. Yes, Papa. James raced back to his siblings. We are keeping all the puppies, are we not? Willa said with amusement. Probably. I'm terrible at saying no to the children. Vernon looked sheepish. They have me wrapped around their little fingers. You are a good father, the best father. Our children are lucky to have you. They are lucky to have both of us. We make a good team, Willa Anders. As the sun set and the children reluctantly came inside for supper, Willa stood at the stove and cooked for her family. Her rough hands worked efficiently, chopping vegetables and stirring pots. These hands had been shaped by hardship, but had found purpose in love and work. Vernon came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. I love you more every day, he whispered. Every single day, I love you more. I did not know that was possible, but you have taught me so many things I did not know. Willa turned in his arms and kissed him, her rough hands cupping his face. I love you too. You saved me, Vernon. You gave me a life worth living. No. Vernon shook his head. We saved each other. We built this life together, brick by brick, day by day. That is what makes it precious. The children rushed into the kitchen, demanding food and attention, and the moment of quiet intimacy passed. But Willa carried it in her heart as she served supper and listened to the children chatter about their day. She carried it as she tucked them into bed that night, kissing each small forehead. She carried it as she and Vernon prepared for bed, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of long partnership. In bed, Vernon reached for her hand as he always did, his thumb tracing over her knuckles and calluses. Beautiful hands, he murmured, half asleep. My wife's beautiful hands. Willa smiled in the darkness. She had learned to believe him, to see her rough hands as badges of honor rather than marks of shame. These hands had survived, had persevered, had built something meaningful. These hands had been kissed by a good man who saw their true worth. Years continued to pass. The children grew and thrived. James, at 16, was Vernon's right-hand man on the ranch, as skilled with cattle and horses as his father. Clara, at 14, had become an accomplished writer and had started helping Willa with the account books, showing a talent for numbers. The twins at 12 were still mischievous, but were also hard workers who never complained about early mornings or difficult tasks. Willa, now in her early 40s, had gray threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Her body was no longer thin, but sturdy and strong, shaped by years of good food and hard work. Her hands were as rough as ever, marked by decades of labor. Vernon, approaching 50, had silver in his hair and beard, but his body was still strong and his eyes still bright when he looked at Willa. He still kissed her hands regularly, still told her she was beautiful, still treated her with the same respect and love he had shown her on that first day in Kelton. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, known for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. Vernon and Willa had earned a reputation as fair employers and good neighbors, always willing to help others in times of trouble. One spring day, when the desert was blooming with wildflowers after a wet winter, a telegram arrived from Philadelphia. It was from a lawyer, informing Willa that a distant cousin she barely remembered had died and left her a small inheritance. Not a fortune, but a respectable sum. What should we do with it? Vernon asked that evening as they sat on the porch. The children were inside doing homework, and the sunset was painting the sky in shades of lavender and rose. Willa considered. I think we should use part of it to make improvements to the ranch. The bunkhouse could use repairs, and perhaps we could invest in some better breeding stock for the herd. And the rest? I think we should save it for the children, for their education, or to help them start their own lives when the time comes. Willa paused. And perhaps we could donate some to the church in town. They are trying to raise money to build a school. Vernon smiled. Those are all excellent ideas, very practical and generous, just like you. I keep thinking about how different my life would have been if I'd inherited money when I was younger. I might not have needed to work in the factory. I might not have answered your advertisement. And then I would have missed all of this. Willa gestured at the ranch, the house, the children visible through the window. So perhaps it is better that the money came now, when I already have everything I need. Do you ever regret it? Leaving Philadelphia, coming to this harsh place, working so hard all these years? Never. Not for a single moment. Willa took Vernon's hand and kissed it, turning the gesture back on him. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You gave me love and respect and a family. You gave me these rough hands, a purpose beyond mere survival. How could I regret any of it? James came out onto the porch, now a young man of 16 with his father's height and his mother's serious gray eyes. Papa, one of the mares is showing signs of labor. You said you wanted to know. I will be right there. Vernon stood, then paused to kiss Willa's forehead. Do not wait up for me. This could take a while. I will come with you, Willa said, also standing. I want to see the foal. They walked to the barn together, their hands clasped, their steps in sync after so many years together. James followed behind, and soon Clara and the twins joined them, nobody wanting to miss the excitement of a birth. The mare labored for 2 hours, and the whole family watched as a spindly-legged foal finally emerged, wet and confused, but alive. Vernon helped clean the foal while Willa soothed the exhausted mother. The children clustered around, their faces alight with wonder. It is a miracle every time, Clara whispered. No matter how many times we see it, it is still a miracle. Yes, Willa agreed. Life is always a miracle. Later, after the mare and foal were settled and the children had finally gone to bed, Willa and Vernon stood outside the barn and looked up at the stars. The Utah sky was as clear as always, the Milky Way a bright river across the darkness. I got a letter today, too, Vernon said quietly, from Margaret in Salt Lake City. She wants us to visit this summer. She says her children are growing up and barely know their cousins. We should go, Willa said immediately. The children would love to see the city, and it would be good for them to know their aunts and cousins. It would mean leaving the ranch for a week or more. Can we manage that? Carlos and the other hands can manage for a week. We have good people working for us, and we have earned a rest, Vernon. We have worked hard for 20 years. We can take 1 week for family. Vernon pulled her close, and Willa rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and horses and hard work. 20 years, he said wonderingly. It has gone so fast. It feels like just yesterday I was meeting you at that train depot in Kelton, terrified that you would take one look at me and run back to Philadelphia. I was the one who was terrified. I thought you would be disappointed when you saw me. I thought my rough hands and plain face would drive you away. Instead, I fell in love with you the moment you offered me your hand to shake. Such a brave, honest gesture, such strong, capable hands. Vernon lifted her hands now and kissed each palm, a gesture that had become ritual over the years. These hands that have shaped our life together, these beautiful hands. Willa smiled up at him, her heart full. I am so glad I answered your advertisement. I am so glad I had the courage to leave everything familiar and come to this wild place. I am so glad I found you. I am glad you found me too. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa Anders. You and our children and this life we have built together. They stood together under the stars for a long time. Two people who had found each other against improbable odds and had built something lasting and true. A factory girl with rough hands and a lonely rancher, brought together by a newspaper advertisement and bound together by love and respect and hard work. Inside the house, their children slept safely in their beds. In the barn, the new foal nursed from its mother. Across the ranch, cattle grazed peacefully in the moonlight. The desert stretched in all directions, vast and beautiful and unforgiving, but no longer lonely because it was filled with life and love. Willa thought about the girl she had been, thin and exhausted and desperate, working 16-hour days in a Philadelphia factory and dreaming of open spaces. That girl could never have imagined this life, this joy, this deep sense of belonging. That girl had hoped only to survive, not to thrive. But she had survived, and more than survived. She had found her way to this place, to this man, to this life. And her rough hands, the hands she had once been ashamed of, had proved to be her greatest asset. They had been strong enough to hold on through hardship, skilled enough to learn new tasks, tender enough to care for babies and animals, and brave enough to reach out for love. "We should go inside," Vernon said finally. "It is getting cold." "In a moment." Willa wanted to hold on to this perfect peace just a little longer. "I am just remembering how blessed I am." "We are both blessed. We have been given more than most people ever find." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their rough, work-worn hands clasped together, two people who had found in each other everything they had ever needed. Inside, they banked the fire and checked on the children one last time, then retired to their own bedroom. In bed, they held each other close, and Willa thought about the years ahead. There would be challenges, certainly. There would be hard times and sorrows, but there would also be joy and love and the satisfaction of work well done. There would be watching their children grow into adults and start their own families. There would be grandchildren someday, new life to fill the house with laughter. And through it all, there would be Vernon, this good man who had seen worth in a factory girl with rough hands, who had kissed those hands and called them beautiful, who had given her not just a home, but a life full of purpose and meaning. "I love you," Willa whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Vernon whispered back. "Forever." They fell asleep in each other's arms, two souls who had found their home in each other, in this wild and beautiful place where anything seemed possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal, watching over the ranch and the family that had been built there, through love and determination and rough hands that knew the true value of hard work and tender care. The story of Willa and Vernon was not a story of easy happiness or quick resolution. It was a story of two people who had struggled and survived and found each other in the vastness of the American West. It was a story of rough hands and gentle kisses, of hard work and deep love, of building something lasting brick by brick and day by day. It was a story of hope fulfilled and dreams exceeded, of a mail-order bride who found more than she had bargained for, and a lonely cowboy who found the partner he had been searching for all his life. It was a story that would continue for decades, as Willa and Vernon grew old together, as their children raised families of their own, as the ranch they had built together prospered and endured. But on this quiet night, with the desert wind whistling softly around the house and the stars shining bright overhead, the story was simply about two people lying together in peace and contentment, their rough hands clasped even in sleep, their hearts beating in harmony, their lives intertwined so completely that they could no longer imagine being separate. Willa had traveled across a continent looking for open spaces and clean air, for a life that offered more than exhausting labor and grinding poverty. She had found all of that and infinitely more. She had found love that valued her for who she was, that saw beauty in her rough hands and strength in her determined spirit. She had found a home where she belonged, where she was cherished, where every day brought new purpose and meaning. And Vernon, who had been slowly withering in his loneliness, who had placed that advertisement more in desperation than hope, had found the woman who would transform his house into a home, who would fill his life with joy and laughter and love. He had found a partner who matched him in strength and determination, who was not afraid of hard work, who faced challenges with courage and grace. Together they had built something remarkable in that harsh and beautiful landscape. They had taken their individual sorrows and struggles and transformed them into shared joy. They had proven that love could bloom even in the desert, that families could thrive even in difficult circumstances, that rough hands could shape lives of beauty and meaning. Their story was one of many in the American West, of people who came seeking opportunity and found family, of strangers who became partners, of hard work and determination rewarded with prosperity and happiness. But for Willa and Vernon, their story was unique and precious. The story of how two lonely people found each other and built a love that would last a lifetime. As dawn broke over the Utah desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Willa stirred in Vernon's arms. Through the window she could see the familiar landscape that had become her home, the barn and corrals and endless sky. She could hear the rooster crowing and the lowing of cattle and the chirping of birds greeting the new day. Vernon's arms tightened around her, and she felt his lips press against her hair. Another day was beginning, bringing with it the usual tasks and responsibilities, the endless cycle of work that was ranch life, but also bringing joy and satisfaction, the pleasure of working alongside someone you loved, of building a life together day by day. Willa looked down at her rough, work-worn hands resting on Vernon's chest, these hands that had endured so much, that had worked so hard, that had been kissed and called beautiful, these hands that had found their true purpose in this place with this man building this life. She smiled and pressed a kiss to Vernon's jaw, then slipped out of bed to begin another day. There were eggs to collect, and cows to milk, and children to feed, and 1,000 other tasks waiting. There was a ranch to run, and a family to care for, and a life to be lived fully and gratefully. As Willa dressed and began her morning routine, her heart was full of contentment. She had traveled so far and endured so much to reach this place, but every step of the journey had been worth it to arrive here, to this life, to this love, to this sense of belonging and purpose. The mail-order bride with rough hands had found her home, and it was more beautiful than anything she had ever dared to dream.